Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our webinar tonight on freezer meal preparation. My name is Mary Lynn Cardell. I'm a registered dietitian, and this event, this webinar, is sponsored by Midwest Child Care. They are providing sponsorships for these webinars so that we can provide all of you with continuing education opportunities from the comfort of your home. I'm a registered dietitian, and so they are hired brought me on to provide these webinars. So thank you so much for attending and spending the next hour with us. Throughout the webinar, we'll show that you have been participating in this webinar. The polls are required in order for you to read. So if you could please complete the polls, and then at the end of the webinar, a survey will pop up on your screen. As the webinar ends, stay on your screen and the survey will pop up after the webinar ends. If you want to just take a minute or so to a couple minutes just to complete that survey, that indicates that you attended, and the survey is also required in order for you to receive your certificate. Once all that is done, within 48 hours of completion of the webinar, I will send out your certificates. Sometimes the certificates, because they go out in mass email, sometimes they'll go to your spam or your junk folder. So if for some reason, after 48 hours, if you have not received a certificate, please check your spam or your junk file to see if it was in those folders. It will either come from the Nutrition Edge or from Mary Lynn Cardell. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, there is a questions tab. Please feel free to ask questions, and we will get your responses as soon as we are able to within the time frame of the webinar. So thanks so much for joining us. So for the next hour, we'll be talking about some tips for making freezer meals. If for some reason you are not familiar with NSPERS, NSPERS is the Nebraska Early Childhood Professional opportunity for all of you to join. We really want to encourage everyone to sign up. It doesn't cost anything, but it gives us a great opportunity, or gives you a great opportunity to know about different continuing education events and resources available to you. And so we do want to really encourage everyone to get their own NSPERS number and sign up and get some information about the programming that they provide and how they can be a resource to you. If you want to just take a picture of this contact information, if you gives some information for you to contact, a phone number for you to call in case you have any questions. So we're going to start off with a poll, and the poll is, do you currently prepare freezer meals as part of your meal planning? So do you currently make freezer meals as part of your meal planning, yes or no? Okay, so it looks like about 71% of you do not use freezer meals as part of your meal planning. About 30% of you do. And so hopefully for those of you who do use freezer meals as part of your meal planning, we'll get some new tips and ideas. And for those of you who don't, hopefully you will learn some new things and consider using this as part of a quick, easy, and inexpensive way to do your meal prep. So a lot of people ask, what exactly is a freezer meal? And the concept behind it is that our freezer meals are meals that we are preparing ahead of time, and that preparation allows us to make fast and quick, easy meals of that. It's, sometimes freezer meals are thought of in bags, and we put kind of all the ingredients or most of the ingredients that we need into a bag, and then we freeze it within that bag. So that's something that makes it, quite easy. Everything's already prepped and ready to go. And then once you need to actually the day of, you just put it in your crock pot. There's also freezer meals that can be made like in containers. So, make you have like raviolis and chicken and rice and lasagnas, and there's different kinds of meals that work really well with that are in containers that are going to go into your oven. So freezer meals aren't only for a quick cook, like a slow cooker, an Instant Pot, but they also can be something that you put in the oven or your stovetop. So the benefits of freezer meals is time is a huge factor with our freezer meals. Freezer meals are require a lot of upfront time, meaning that preparation time, kind of getting all your ingredients together, figuring out how much of things that you need. But the nice thing is, because most of us are pretty busy, especially with your schedules, you probably don't have a lot of time to prep the day of, either when you have little kids kind of running around the house that you need to care for, or if you're doing an evening meal for your family. Oftentimes, you probably have just the kids are just leaving and you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of preparation, chopping, cutting, those types of things. So the nice thing is it's a make ahead meal. You can make them generally taking one 3 to 4 hour period that you have available to you, preparing 10 to 12, 15 meals at that time, and then using those meals throughout the month. It just gives it's a little bit upfront time, but it really does save a lot of time on that day of cooking. So if you prep multiple freezer meals at once, which is what I would always recommend, it's so much easier, depending on how much freezer space you have, to prepare 10 to 15 meals at one time is really a great way of doing that. And then one of the nice things is it just one time you get the cutting board out and you may cut all your vegetables on one cutting board and then all your meats on another cutting board. And you don't have to keep washing and reusing things. The no cook freezer meals are faster to prep than traditional freezer meals. And those, so the no cook freezer meals are things that you don't have to do any preparation or any cooking prior to putting them all in the bag. So for example, if it requires you to have chicken, you just cut up raw chicken. If it requires you to have ground beef, you can just put in a pound of ground beef that's in there, that's defrosted, or that's fresh ground beef. So the nice thing is you can actually put everything you need for the most part in the bag, and then you freeze it, and then everything is ready to go when you are ready to serve it. It really does save a lot of money. And so especially if you take advantage of sales at the grocery store, it can really save money if you'd have less waste because you're using a lot more. You can buy in bulk. So that bulk purchasing can be less expensive. And it really allows us to be creative with how we're using some of our produce, as well as some of our meats. So kind of getting started, the things that are really important is freezer space. What happens oftentimes is people get excited about trying to do freezer meals, but then they realize when they need to put everything away, they actually don't have enough room in their freezer. And so I think that's one of the most important things to start off is making sure that we have that room for our freezer meal. So cleaning out a space, and for sometimes if like we get part of a cow from my husband's cousins, and so I'll use a lot of that meat when we're making freezer meals, and so I'm making room by taking out some of the foods that I'm going to actually be using. So making sure that you have the freezer space, getting rid of anything in your freezer. This is a really great opportunity for you to kind of go through your freezer, look at expiration dates, get rid of anything that's expired or that you no longer use, or if there's things that haven't expired, and it might be something that you want to try to incorporate into a freezer meal. If anything has been in the freezer for over a year, you might be wise just to get rid of it. And then I would always recommend a freezer inventory sheet. And that's basically a sheet of paper that tells you everything that you have in your freezer. I think when you're cleaning out your freezer, making space for your freezer meals, I think this is a really good time to do a freezer inventory sheet. A lot of times we don't know everything that's in our freezer, and then we're buying extra, or we're not utilizing those foods in time, and so it is really beneficial in that you write down everything that you have in there and the expiration dates. And that way you can kind of make some plans as far as meal planning on based on what you already have available to you and those expiration dates. Um, so most of our freezer meals will last in a standard upright attached freezer for up to 3 months. And why that's important is our freezers that are attached to a refrigerator are going to be not as cold as a standalone chest freezer. And so if you have a freezer that particularly a side-by-side freezer, that's not going to keep things as cold. And so you want to use those things within 3 months if they're in a standard side-by-side freezer. If you need more space, if it's something that, if you really like freezer meals, I think they're amazing. Having a chest freezer, a separate freezer. A chest freezer is going to keep your food colder and longer. You can keep it up to 12 months as long as it's packaged properly. So a chest freezer, because it's not open as often, is colder because everything's packed kind of together. It's going to stay longer and colder, and so the expiration date is elongated. So that's just something to think about. If you have your favorite meals that you or your family enjoys, most of those things can be adapted to a freezer meal. So kind of thinking about whether it needs to go in the oven or if it can go into a slow cooker, an Instant Pot. Pretty much every meal that you prepare, for the most part, can be transformed into a freezer meal and made ahead of time. There are a couple things that work better than others. So some of our best freezer meals are things like chilies, stews, and non-milk based soups. So we know milk-based items aren't going to work well, and that's basically because they do not cook well in our microwave, in our slow cooker or the Instant Pot. Our meats generally do really well. So pretty much all of our meats freeze really well. So most of our roast, but pretty much all of our meats are going to freeze well. Our casseroles generally freeze well, and baked pasta with tomato sauces bake really well, cook really well. Some things that don't really work well in a freezer meal, and so you may want to kind of evaluate if these are some things that you do have in your favorite meals. We can always adapt those. So if it's something that has dairy, we can usually add the dairy at the end. So if you're cooking something like a stroganoff that needs sour cream, generally you would prepare everything up until the last 10 or 15 minutes and then add that sour cream at the end. Same thing, adding the cream cheese, mayonnaise, those types of things at the end, last, 10 to 20 minutes of half an hour of cooking. But if it's something that needs to be added earlier, oftentimes they do not cook well in a slow cooker. Something with a crumb topping. So if you have something that maybe you have a macaroni and cheese and you like the crumb topping that you like to put on it, you can cook it in a freezer meal and then transfer it to the oven to make that crumb topping better if that works best for you. Fried foods do not freeze well. Those are just, it's hard to get around that. Fruits and vegetables with a high water content like melons and lettuce do not freeze well. And then meals with uncooked potatoes or rice do not work well. We want to generally cook those, and we're going to talk a little bit about rice later on in the webinar. So oftentimes I like to double or triple a recipe so that if I'm making one recipe, I'll make three of that so that I can cook, I can prep and buy the items one time and then make 3 different meals. So if I'm making 15 different freezer meals, and kind of, putting those, every, 10 days I'll have using the same meal twice. That gives me some variety without having to each time recreate that meal. So that way, if I'm cutting certain vegetables or meats into certain sizes, I just do it one time, and then it also makes pouring and portioning size into my freezer bags a little bit quicker and easier. Uh, So we do know, I think one of the biggest things that people have a difficult time with is blocking the time to prep. And so it may take, depending on how much you're preparing, it could take, up to 3 to 4 hours from start to finish. That's kind of getting all your ingredients together, chopping and preparing, and then your cleanup. But if you think that if we can get 15 meals out of that short period of time with preparation and cleanup, that's a pretty good bang for your buck as far as your time management goes. So that's something to think about. If you're trying to convert a recipe to a no-cook freezer meal, so if it's your favorite recipe, something that you like, you want to follow the recipe's instructions until the point that you would put the meal into your oven or your slow cooker. So do everything just like you normally would, and then put all that into your freezer bag before it would go into the oven. So everything's going to be just normal, and then all you do is you're going to put it in the freezer instead of the slow cook or the oven. And that way, actually, your items stay freshest. So if we cook the meat ahead of time, the meat's not going to have the same flavor when we're trying to put it in the slow cooker or the oven, or the same texture. So by actually freezing it raw, it actually has the same texture and flavor as if you're going to be cooking it and preparing it that day. So if a recipe says to add the ingredients to your oven or slow cooker raw, we can talk about that. We just freeze those. So you can freeze like little loaves of carrot bread, if carrots, raw meatloaf, roast, uh, raw veggies. Those are just, putting everything in that freezer bag. Just be aware of particularly the worst things to freeze, which is we don't want like the mayonnaise and melons and lettuce. Those things do not freeze well. If a recipe calls for some cooking before putting the food into your oven or slow cooker, do that cooking before freezing. So that's the only exception. Generally, if sometimes they'll say things like saute your onions or saute garlic. They might say saute your veggies particularly, or brown a certain item like your meats. That you could do ahead of time, but we don't want to do, for most things, we don't need to cook things ahead of time, except if it's in that situation that it says to brown, saute those beforehand. If the recipe tells you to cook the pasta before assembling your casserole for ready to eat at that time, then you can cook the oven, but cook the pasta. But generally, we want to only cook the pasta to al dente. So it's just kind of almost like a quick parboil, and you don't want to cook it all the way. So just enough to soften it, and then that's it. You don't want to have it to the point where you'd actually serve it. So a quick to time in the pasta, if it says maybe 10 minutes, you may just cook it for 3 to 4 minutes. When you're assembling, especially if you've had something that you have had to cook, you want to make sure before you put that item into the freezer that you've cooled it to room temperature. That's going to help so that it stays fresher, but it's also not going to get those ice crystals that can increase freezer burn risk. So when you assemble everything, especially if you had to cook something ahead of time, you want to make sure you cool it to that room temperature before you freeze it. If you need to, if you're making something, so if I'm making 15 different freezer meals, I probably will keep one out just to use for dinner that night, so that I don't have to make another dinner that night. So just kind of being aware of that. So if that's the case, it may be cooked faster if it didn't come from a colder state. So if it's at room temperature, It may cook a little bit faster than if it was at colder. We want to make sure we defrost things before we put them into our slow cooker, but generally if we defrost things, it's at a higher temperature than a room temperature, so the room temperature is going to cook a little bit quicker. Our items with and making sure that we cool it, making sure that there's no very little air. We should not have any issues with freezer burn. I think one of the big things is you want to use quality. Big store brand purchaser for things like some of my canned veggies and beans and things like that. But I have, in my experience, those store brand bags do not hold up with freezer meals as well as those as your Ziploc or your Hefty bags. The Ziploc and the Hefty bags do, it really is a big difference with the quality, especially when you're making a freezer meal. So I do think having good sturdy bags is definitely worth the extra cost in this situation. The packaging and how you package your freezer meals can really make a big difference in how they cook. So what I always recommend is you want to get your plastic freezer bag, your good quality plastic freezer bag, and then you want to put your beans and your vegetables at the bottom of the bag. So you put those in first, and then put in your spices and your sauces in the middle, and then you put your meat on the top. So if you're looking at your freezer bag, your meat should always be on the top closest to where you close it, and then your spices and your sauces, and then the beans and the vegetables at the bottom. This kind of method, if you want to take a picture of this, kind of so that you know which way is the best way to put it in your bag. The reason I think this works really well is your sauce and your spices won't stick to the freezer bag as much, and so it utilizes you get most of the spices that actually get into your crock pot. And the other thing is your meat's going to be the first thing that you pour into the slow cooker. So it's going to be closest to the heating source because we want to make sure our meat cooks thoroughly. And so that kind of just assures that the spices all get in there and that the meat is the first thing into your crock pot. And so that is closest to the heating source. It's extremely important. This is one of the most important things, is removing as much air as possible before sealing the bag. And if we do this, it's going to help your freezer meals stay fresh longer and prevent freezer burn. And so really just making sure that you're trying to get as much air out, so that's not, that your juices and things aren't seeping out, but just try to get as much air out. Some people just, put everything in and then close it, just trying to seal out, get as much, air as possible out. It's one of the most biggest, most common mistakes is that people don't try to get the air out, and so there's a lot of air, and it also makes it more likely that it's going to rupture when it's in your freezer. So after you so it can freeze in your freezer. Some people like to stack your freezer, so I think something that you want to think about is one is how your freezer, just the kind of where you're going to put this in your freezer, and the idea that we always want to ideally defrost our freezer meal thoroughly before we put it into the crock pot, or if you're using an Instant Pot to cook, you can put your items in there frozen, but it's really hard to put um, a frozen um, a frozen square into a round pan. And so if you're someone who doesn't like to defrost things, and it can be frustrating if you have these squares, frozen squares of your freezer bags. And so really kind of if you're not making enough, if you're not making a lot, if you have a lot of freezer space, some people like to put and then take it out. So putting in a round bowl or something like that, so it's that shape, if that's what's easiest for you. I think for most people, it's laying it flat and stacking them tends to work the best, and then just making sure that you're defrosting those overnight. So I do have another poll, and the poll is, what are common mistakes when preparing freezer meals? Not removing as much air as possible from, sorry, I had a couple typos on there. Not removing as much as air as possible from the bag before freezing, buying poor quality freezer bags, using foods that don't freeze well, like melons and lettuce, all of the above or none of the above. All right, we'll just give you another 30 seconds. What are common mistakes when preparing freezer meals? And everybody 100% got all of the above. So making sure we get as much air out as possible, really buying quality freezer bags, it's so important, and making sure that we're not using foods that don't freeze well, particularly things like the melons, the lettuce, mayonnaise, dairies, those types of things. So if you store, for using things for an oven, so, in the second picture that we showed, you can have oven ready freezer meals. So if you're preparing oven ready freezer meals, I would always make sure you put it in aluminum pans. I think the reusable ones are great, but if you want just a regular aluminum pan, that's great too. I do not recommend freezing in glass. Glass is not meant to go straight from the freezer to the oven. It's just more likely to break and shatter. And so we've had incidences where if we take out the freezer and then it goes into the oven, especially a hot oven, it's going to crack and break. So we obviously don't want that to happen. Plus, depending on how long you're going to be using your freezer, keeping these freezer meals, if you are someone who doesn't have a large supply of aluminum containers or aluminum pans, or metal pans, those aluminum disposable ones work well because you can reuse them, but they're not going to take your basic supply that's in your kitchen. So if you are planning so that's kind of like, we don't want it to be out of commission. I think it works well to place a plastic layer of wrap on your dish when you're freezing it. So if you're having something that is going to go into the oven, I would always recommend that you wrap it in plastic wrap. That is a protective so it doesn't get freezer burn. And then put an aluminum foil on it. The big thing that you want to think about is we want to make sure that we're taking that plastic wrap off before you put it in the oven. And so if we get in that habit of knowing that, usually if we wrap it really well, we can see that there's plastic wrap there. Just make sure that we remember to take that plastic wrap off before we put it in the oven. Another tip I think works really well is if you are making multiple casseroles, which generally works the best. If you're going to make one, you might as well make two or three. Is using some cardboard. So I'll use cardboard from maybe an Amazon box or from a thicker cereal box, and put those in between. That way, it gives a little bit of structure to support the pans, so they don't collapse onto one another. So like a Amazon box, I think works really well. But if not, you can even try something like a cereal box. To freeze items that are individual portions, so if you have like individual cookies or individual meatballs, you want to freeze those individuals. You want to put those individuals on a cookie sheet so that they're separated. So if I'm making meatballs and if I put all the meatballs in a bag, the meatballs are all going to stick together. And so in that situation, what you want to do is you want to make sure you have those individual meatballs and then put them on a cookie sheet, kind of spread out. Put those in the freezer for a little bit of time, half an hour, 2 hours, up to 2 hours, to make sure that they're a little bit cold, and ideally to the point where they're slightly frozen. And that will, then you can take those off, immediately put those in your bags, and that way they don't in your plastic bag. So it really does help to keep those so you don't have a big lump of things that are supposed to be individual, all clumping together. Uh, so just like the wax paper, parchment paper, or your plastic wrap, that's really important so that you don't have freezer burn. We just want to make sure, once again, that we remove those plastic wraps and the wax paper before we put them in the oven so that they don't freeze on us. Another big important thing is labeling. So we want to make sure that we're labeling our our bags. Our bags need to be labeled ideally before you put anything in them. So a flat, fresh plastic bag is going to work. It's going to get labeled. It's going to be much better than trying to label something after you have put your food in there. So really making sure that you're labeling everything ahead of time. That also helps you to know kind of what you're still preparing, and it helps you to kind of do things, all at the same time. So if you're making um, 3 of one item, then you can have all 3 of your plastic bags together. Uh, Also thinking, a Sharpie usually works really well, but you also can get freezer labels. So there are printable, like Avery has freezer labels. If you want to look, they're basically waterproof labels. And so you do want to make sure it's a waterproof label. So if you are someone who's fairly organized and likes to put kind of everything in on your computer, I would recommend getting the Avery waterproof labels. They work really well. And then you can put all your information on that label and then just slap it on your freezer bag. So we want to make sure that we're getting that information and about kind of what information to put on our labels. So have another poll for us, and the poll is, what are some tips for freezer meals? All right, let's see what the results are on that. Okay, so you want to, everybody, for the most part, got most of these answers right. We want to use using glass to go from freezer to stove is something we don't want to do, right? So we want to avoid using glass. That might have been a little confusing. I recommend inserting some cardboard between your layers, and between your freezer bags, as well as your aluminum containers for support. And then freeze individual items first and then add them to your bag. So answers 2 and 3 are the right answers. I know that first one may be a little confusing, but we don't want to use glass to go right from the freezer to the stove. It's going to likely crack and break once it hits the oven. So thinking about labeling, so we want to, if you're putting a label on, we want to always make sure we're labeling all of our freezer meals. And so these are what I think are the best things to put on your label. If there's other things that you want to put on your label, you're more than welcome. Using the computer and frozen and the waterproof labels, I do think is the easiest way to do that. But if you're even using a Sharpie, you want to make sure that you put the ingredients. It's particularly putting down if there's anything that needs to be added the day of meal prep, so that it makes sure that you have. So let's say you need to have rice, or maybe you need to have mayonnaise, or you want to add lettuce. Making sure that you put that on there so that you, when you pull it out to defrost it, you know exactly what you need to make that meal for that night. Making sure you put the cooking instructions, so how long it needs to be cooked, and if it's, if you're putting it into an oven, the temperature, if you're putting in uh, a slow cooker, how long and at what heat, if it's high, low, medium. I would always put the day that you put the item in the freezer or prepared it, so that you know how long it's been in there, and then just really kind of being aware if you're having a attached freezer to your refrigerator, you do want to use those within 3 months. I like to put what ingredients are inside, and so that's something that I think is nice, knowing exactly what's in there. If you're looking at, okay, I want to increase, I need more, or more servings, oftentimes the easiest way is to increase the amount of meat, but we also know that that is often a more expensive method. So you can generally increase the volume, but you really want to make sure that you're aware of how much is going to fit into your crock pot or your slow cooker, as well as how much is going to fit into your bag. So oftentimes it's almost easier to, if you have to serve a larger number of people, is to prepare two separate bags. That way you don't have to worry about having the freezer bag be too full, and then possibly using like two slow cookers if you need to. So simply, having more meat is one way, although that's for most people a more expensive way. So we think about 1 pound of meat is going to feed about 3 adults. So thinking about for kiddos, so if you're thinking about your kiddos, 3 adults, they say 3 ounces. And so kind of putting that down to 1 pound of meat is 16 ounces. We do have a question. It says, if I didn't want to put them on a cookie sheet, could I just wrap them in plastic wrap individually and place in the bag before freezing in case I wasn't going to use them all at once? So I'm assuming this is about the meatballs, and you can do that. The only thing that I would think about is if you're going to put any kind of sauces or spices or other items in that freezer bag, I think it's going to get wrapped in that plastic wrap. But if you are just making meatballs and you just want to have individual meatballs, then that's a fine way of doing that. If it's something that you're concerned about having, about not having to use all of them, I still think that you can individually freeze them and then pull them out one at a time. The nice thing is if you freeze them ahead of time, they're not going to stick together, so that you can just pull out what you need. So just kind of being aware of how you are using that for preparation. I would not do the plastic wrap if it's going to be already mixed with sauces and spices and other veggies and things like that. Okay. If you're cooking only for like 1 or 2 people, cooking for 3 to 5 small children, you may want to split the recipe into smaller portions so that you can, if you just have a couple kids, if your kids are, only a few kids are eating, then you might want to split it into smaller bags, so that you have smaller portion sizes. So the nice thing about this is it really is adaptable to what your needs are. It just takes a little bit of forethought in figuring out, okay, when am I going to use this and how many do I need to serve? So for smaller, slow cooked meals, if you have, thinking about the size of your slow cooker is really going to impact how fast. And so knowing kind of how your slow cooker prepares your food. So a smaller slow cooker may take a little bit longer to prepare, especially if it's full. If you have a larger slow cooker and so it's not as full, it might cook a little bit faster than the recommended time. I would generally recommend that you thaw all your meals, your frozen meals, before you cook. It just allows for more accurate cooking time, uh, and making sure it's thorough cooking, because especially if we're having meat, we want that thorough cooking. So everything, having that raw meat at a colder, kind of a temperature safety zone for longer periods of time can put things at risk. And so, especially for serving those at risk, particularly children, elderly, individuals with immune compromise, we've seen that first. High susceptible foods at those vulnerable temperatures for too long. Freezer, freezer bags. So I'm not sure what just happened there. Um, I'm not sure what just happened. I'm just going to I'm just going to keep talking because I'm not sure why this just went out. And let me try to see if I can do one other thing to kind of change it around. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and then hopefully we can kind of figure out what's going on. So most freezer meals do need to be thawed. So making sure that the best way to thaw is obviously going to put our bag in our refrigerator overnight. That is going to be the safest way for us to thaw our food. If for some reason you don't have time to put it in the freezer, another idea is to put it in cold running water. So that cold running water will help it to defrost and to keep it at a safe temperature. As a last resort, we could do it in the microwave, but generally that's not going to be our best technique. We don't like having plastic in the microwave, and our plastic bags degrade in the microwave, and so we really want to refrain from thawing anything in the microwave that is in a plastic bag. So the best way is going to obviously to be overnight or to put it in cold water. So the USDA is going to recommend that we thaw it overnight. It may take up to 2 days to thaw. And so that's where that kind of preparation ahead of time is kind of paying attention to when it needs to be served and how long it's going to take to actually defrost. So if you if you are going to put it in cold water, you want to make sure that you're keeping that cold water running. And so you should be replacing that cold water about every 30 minutes. And so we do want to make sure that if you're, if you're doing any kind of thawing in the microwave, that that you put it in a glass bowl prior to trying to thaw it. So some tips to remember to try to thaw it are, setting a reminder on our smartphone. So kind of, thinking about how to remind yourself on your smartphone. Associate the thawing of your meal and pulling it out of the freezer with something that you do every day. So maybe, you're having a freezer meal. Generally, they work really well, especially those busy times. So during the week is probably the best time for a lot of people. And so, every night before you're cleaning, or when you're cleaning your kitchen, or what's a time that works well for you. Asking someone to remind you, so using a timer or a planner, and making sure that you keep your meal plan somewhere that you can see on a regular basis. It's really important. If you can't see your meal plan, it's more likely that we're going to forget the location. Sticky notes, writing ourselves a note, uh, keeping our crock pot on the kitchen counter, hanging our keys on a hook that's closest to our freezer so that we remember to pull things out. So keeping in mind that our slow cookers work best when they are not full. So making sure that it's not 100% full. So only about 2/3 full at the very most. So we don't want to ever have it more than 2/3 full, because if it is disconnect from audio. Can they hear us? Okay. Can you if can you make sure that you can hear us? We're trying to figure out the why the video is off, but making sure that you can all hear me through the audio. So if for some reason you can't, just let me know. Uh, So other things to think about, if you're brand new to slow cooking, it may take some time to kind of experiment with your slow cooker so that you can start figuring that out and kind of figuring out how your slow cooker works, whether it's, low setting and high setting. Oftentimes that high setting is cooks very quickly. And so, some people really like using the lower setting because it seems to be a little bit, their meats tend to be a little bit more, uh, I'd say, tender with that slow cooking. So thinking about, ideally that we aren't eliminating all using a slow cooker while we're not in the home. And so as a safety precaution, it is always recommended that the slow cooker, that we use a slow cooker when we're home. So we do want to avoid using the slow cooker if we're not home. Okay, we're just trying to,
Can you just share your main screen?
how do I do that? Okay, we're trying to figure this out. So hopefully, can you hopefully see this soon? Okay, there we go. Sorry guys, my husband is my technical support. So thinking about if you do double your recipe, you may need to cook it for a little bit longer. So just being aware of that. If for recipes with sauce, oftentimes doubling the amount of sauce. So if it's something, having that extra sauce is going to make sure that it doesn't burn and that it cooks more thoroughly. I think it's, if you're new to slow cooking and you're just buying one that has a timer is really nice. That way it turns off and it may keep warm. So using, really making sure that when you're preparing that kind of that prep day, you do want to kind of schedule your freezer day or schedule that day ahead of time, making sure that you have that larger block of time and making sure that you have all your ingredients ahead of time. So, uh, so if we have, a lot of items and buying those items in bulk, being able to prepare those items. So if we're making potatoes and you have 2 different or 3 different items that are going to have potatoes, you cut all the potatoes at one time and then you kind of divide them up for what each bag is going to need. If I'm cutting up peppers, I'll cut up all my peppers at one time so that it just makes it easy. And then you kind of say, okay, knowing what items are going to be in each, having a little on the ingredient list or having a sheet of paper, I think in front works really well so that you know how much to put into each bag. I personally, like I said before, I'll make 3 items at one time. I just think it really eases, if I can, know I put a cup into each, a cup of beans into each, and a cup of chicken into each, and it just makes it really go a lot smoother. So making sure that you have that prep day already kind of ready to go for yourself. So doing that grocery shopping, sometimes the grocery shopping and also your grocery list can take some time. So, thinking about if we're adding the grocery list and the grocery shopping, that may take another hour, 2 hours, depending on how long you spend at the grocery store. So if you have a full day, that may be about 5 hours of preparation, which seems kind of overwhelming, but at the same point, it really is going to save you hours and hours on the backside when you're actually the day of having a meal that you're you're ready to just put it in the microwave or put it in the oven or put in the slow cooker. Those gallon sound size, make sure they're freezer bags. There is a big difference between a freezer bag and a regular bag. The freezer bags are going to be much thicker, and so you do need that thicker bag. It's going to protect it from the freezer burn. Or if you're going to use like aluminum or disposable pans, have those already. Figuring out how you want to put your label on, whether it's a Sharpie or a waterproof label, using like a wax paper, a plastic wrap, foil, and also your cardboard so that you can separate the bags as well as the aluminum containers, so casserole dishes, so they don't sink on each other. And then kind of thinking about, okay, what do I already have on hand? Trying to use up as much items as you can, looking at your inventory of your freezer and that extra prep time. So the nice thing is we peel, chop everything all at once. It really saves a lot of time. So if you do something like lasagna freezes super well. And it cooks really well. You just once again you're making something like a lasagna using like those no cook noodles work really well. If you don't like the no cook noodles, if you're going to use regular noodles, you just want to cook it till an al dente. So maybe if it says 10 minutes, you want only to cook about 3 to 4 minutes, and then oftentimes we'll put a little bit extra sauce so that when you're cooking it in the oven, it will cook perfectly. Something with enchiladas, so thinking about if we're putting tortillas that put a sauce on them, they don't freeze well. Uh, I think what freezes well is like breakfast burritos freeze really well, but when we put a sauce on them, they get kind of puffy and kind of gross. So what I'll do is I'll make the enchilada filling, and then the day of I will have the thawed enchilada filling and put them in the tortillas that day. You can try it if you want to. I just think it kind of gets a little, I don't like the texture of the tortillas that way. But if I'm having tortillas that don't have a sauce like your breakfast burritos, those work really well frozen. So kind of play a little bit of playing with it, but generally if we put a sauce on your tortillas, they're going to kind of puff up and get kind of gross. Um, so thinking about other tips that I do, if you're thinking, wow, this is a little bit more overwhelming that I'm ready for, I would do what we call little meal helpers, and this is something I do all the time, is I'll cook up a big batch of ground beef or a big batch of chicken or beef or something like that, and I'll cook them and then chop them into individual uh, like bite-sized pieces, or if I have like hamburger, I'll just put it into 1 pound freezer bags. And then you want to make sure that you cool it, because if you don't cool it, it's just going to turn into a big clump. So you want to cool it before you throw it in the freezer. Make sure you label it. But then what I'll do is if I want to make chili, or if I want to make tacos, or if I want to make stroganoff or something like that, I'll just pull out that already cooked ground beef. That way I just have to add it. I'll defrost it and I just add it. So that saves that extra step of preparing that meat the day of my meal prep. I do this all the time with chicken, so that I can just make chicken noodle soup, chicken and rice. I'll make enchiladas, those types of things. So it really does make it a lot easier. So that's kind of something to think about if you're not quite sure you're ready for the full freezer meal. I'll also do things like today I did a bunch of peppers. So I cut up a bunch of peppers for one meal, and then I just chopped them all up and made them for another meal that I'm going to prep down the road. So it's really, having those little helpers if you're making something, maybe cook, especially things that take a lot of time to chop and cook, chop and peel. Cooking, chopping and peeling extra, and then putting those in a freezer bag, and knowing that you're going to use them within, a couple weeks, I think works really well. I think a really important thing is we want to make sure we cool things before we put them in the freezer. That keeps that so it's not the water collection, especially if something's hot. It's going to have those ice crystals. It's going to make your food a little bit more watery, especially if some of those items like lasagna, if we have it hot, it's going to kind of get crystally and a little bit soggy. It also increases the risk of freezer burn. So that's a really important thing to think about, is cooling that down. Rice is something that a lot of people have asked a lot about, is can you reheat rice? And so we do know that rice is a little bit more problematic. So I want to kind of go through this before kind of a last thing to kind of talk about. We do know that rice can contain a bacteria called Bacillus cereus. It can survive some cooking processes. And so it's bacteria that can cause food poisoning. Some people might have heard about this. So especially in reheated rice. And it can cause some vomiting and diarrhea and other health issues. And so you want to make sure that if you're going to reheat rice, you do it properly. So we want to kind of talk about the proper ways. If it's done properly, the USDA says that we can safely cook, store, and reheat rice. And cooked frozen rice reheats really well, and makes it really easy, because rice can take a long time to prepare. So we just want to make sure if you are someone who likes to use rice in your meals, I generally don't advise putting it. Sometimes if we're putting it like a chicken and rice with the sauces, rice does not freeze well that way, but rice does freeze well if it's by itself. And so we want to make sure that if you're going to use rice, you prepare it correctly. Obviously, always wash your hands so that we can really decrease the risk of any kind of contaminant, and making sure that we're not touching anything that could have possibly raw animals, or any kind of eggs or something like that that could potentially have any kind of bacteria on it. We want to make sure that we're cooking the rice to the right temperature. So we want to make sure that when we cook our rice and when it's done, it's out of that temperature danger zone. And our temperature danger zone is between 40 and 140 degrees. So we want to make sure it's higher than 140 degrees. And so we want to make sure it's over 140 degrees, and that's when it would be completed. So before you serve it, before you are done finished cooking it, you want to make sure your rice is over 140 degrees. The other thing is you want to make sure that you cool those leftovers, and you cool them quickly. The best way to cool it is to divide it into shallow bowls, smaller shallow bowls, and put them in a sealed, like a plastic wrap or a lid, and cool them in the refrigerator. And we want to make sure that we cool those things down so that they can get to that proper temperature, and they're not at that temperature danger zone between 40 and 140 degrees more than 2 hours total. So we know that rice or any hot food should not be out of that temperature danger zone at room temperature for more than an hour. So that's something to really kind of think about, is that cooking period. Anytime it's been out at room temperature for more than an hour, it's going to increase that risk of bacteria. And then we want to make sure that we're storing it properly. So making sure that we're storing it, making sure it's properly sealed. If you're going to put it in the refrigerator, you want to use it within 3 to 4 days. If you're going to put it in a freezer, you want to make sure that you've cooled it first, put it in those freezer bags, and then using those leftovers within 3 to 4 months. and then making sure that your refrigerator is at proper temperature. So that's a big thing. Our refrigerators need to be at proper temperature. So hopefully that gave you some information. Hopefully, you have some ideas about what freezer meals are. If you want to complete the survey, I appreciate you completing the survey, and then I will send out your certificates. I apologize for the technical difficulties in the middle of the webinar, but hopefully we got everything back to normal and you guys all were able to see the rest of it. So I will send those certificates out within 48 hours. They might go to your junk mail or your spam, so make sure you check those before you send me an email that you did not receive it. Thanks so much. Have a good night. Bye-bye.